I'm Dean White. Over the last 23 years working in medical school admissions at both University of Minnesota, and at Johns Hopkins, I've read over 30,000 applications. Welcome inside the decision room.
Today, he simplifies admissions to 3 phases: screening, interviews, and the committee decision. Phase 1, screening.
We had a subset of individuals called the screeners. I had as many as 20, and I had as few sometimes as 10. But then every application had to be read.
For the 2028 cycle, Johns Hopkins received 6,200 applications. And if you have 10 screeners, each screener is responsible for over 600. Isn't it scary to have one person who has to read 600 other applications to be responsible for your future? It is. So what do they do about that?
So even though the number itself was maybe, let's say 7,000 ANCAS applications, you're really doubling that number because of the double review process.
They read the application twice. So each screener is not only responsible for 600, but rather for 1,200. Now, why?
We don't want to miss something or cater to a reviewer's own prejudices. We all have them, and I may favor someone who's very socially oriented.
Right.
And others may say, well, I like someone who's really research oriented. Well,
Premeds work so hard on their journey and application. And I respect that AdComs put in the work to acknowledge that. But let's be real, 1,200 applications per screener? That's just not possible without...
I'm not gonna waste my time with someone who had no clinical experience. This person isn't gonna go very far. And there had to be a reason why they didn't. But It couldn't be, well, they didn't have any opportunities.
So you can't have red flags. Screeners are actively searching for them. And if you have no clinical experience and go to a large university like UCLA where every other pre-med has them, you better have a pretty darn good explanation or your application is getting rejected right then and right there. Now, most pre-meds don't know what a truly competitive application looks like. And if you feel lost and scared that you're not quite there yet, take a look at our 8 full ANCAS applications in our application database. These pre-meds got into the top medical schools in the country. We've sent this now to over 11,400 pre-meds who are part of the Pre-Med Catalyst community. To join, click the application database link in the description box below. So outside of red flags though, how do these screeners know exactly what to look for? How do they define what good or bad is? Do they use a point-by-point rubric system?
One of the things you tell the committee, this is the percentage of people typically invited to interview. This is the profile of those people who've interviewed.
So they anchor themselves based on previous cohorts of students.
So I'm not saying that they had to be lockstep, but if you realize that, the average applicant at a school like Hopkins is a 3.72, let's just for argument's sake, and this person has a 3.5, all right, that doesn't mean they won't get an interview, but what else is in that application that will justify that? Because then they better have some extraordinary service, leadership, research, but if they didn't have all that and they were just an average applicant to medical schools, that isn't necessarily going to fly with the committee.
This is holistic admissions. You don't need a 3.72. You don't need to be the head scribe at your clinic. You don't need 3 first author publications. But if something is weak, you better cover it up or double down on your strengths, because these screeners are looking for any reason to reject you. So if AdComs are anchored to this Johns Hopkins profile, how did they build that profile in the first place?
I learned from talking to faculty, physicians who work there. This is the type of person, and other students, this is the type of person who succeeds at Hopkins. And that's what I tried to communicate to the larger committee. You have to understand what the institution is about, and then try to encourage your committee members to keep a focus on that so that people knew what to look for instead of taking wild guesses,
That is how AdComs build their classes. And once you've developed a mold of what works at Johns Hopkins, you can filter your 1,200 applications through that lens. So how long does this system take for each application?
I think, again, based on one's experience, new reviewers on average might spend about 30 minutes, 40 minutes on an application, but it gradually will drop to about 10 to 15 minutes because they start to focusing on some key elements.
You've built that application over 3 years and over 100 hours of writing, and it takes them less than 10 minutes to come to a decision. And that decision?
Recommend or not recommend. We used to use, a third category, like, hold. We called it hold. I got rid of the hold because too many people would rely on hold. I'd say make a decision. That's one or the other, interview or not.
And you'll want to be in the recommend pile. That comes only from earning a spot through intentionally building a competitive application. And you can't do that if you make the wrong decisions. If you're applying to medical school in the coming year or two, we would love to support you. Our Pre-Med Catalyst students that submit their applications on time have an acceptance rate of 100%. And that's only because of how closely we work with our students. In fact, we can only take 4 students per month until we're full. Click the application cycle advising link to book a free strategy call before we are full for the cycle. Phase 2, interviews. Interviews vary from institution to institution. At Hopkins, it is 2 45-minute one-on-one traditional interviews. And at the end, what comes of it?
After the interview, we would ask the interviewers to write using a standard format. Is this the person that the recommenders described? And then I'd ask them to tell me, is this someone you think would fit in well here? Why?
Now, many pre-meds think that this interviewer is their white knight, your advocate that will get you in the door, but that's actually not the case at Hopkins.
And this was the hard part for committee members. You're not their advocate. You're just explaining how you saw them in that 35, 40-minute interview.
Their role is to be an objective observer. They merely just translate your conversation to the committee. And ultimately, they only have 2 responsibilities. One is to summarize your story. For example,
Mike is first generation and yet has had an opportunity to go to an excellent school, whatever that school might be, and clearly has made his mark there.
And 2 is to make a yes or no decision. Not about whether or not you should be admitted, but rather,
this is how he is described by his letter writers, and it fits exactly with what I saw. Yeah, and I would give examples of some things that Mike may have said in the interview that would confirm, or affirm, I guess, what the recommenders had said. So I mean it may sound pretty brief, but that's what we're looking for: affirmation of what we read in the application.
Congruence. Are they the same person? Yes or no? Now, congruence is way harder than it sounds. You need true attention to detail to pull together your personal statement, your work activities, your letters of recommendation, your secondary, and your interview into one cohesive application. And it's this cohesion that separates pre-meds who get into medical school with those who do not. And if you're applying to medical school in the coming year or two, you don't want to mess this up. Our students have earned full rides to Kaiser and have gotten into UCSF, and we want the same for you. Book a free strategy call in the link in the description box below now before we can't take on any more students. Phase 3, inside the decision room. Now, we have a highly curated group of pre-meds, and the official committee has to make a decision. How do they start?
The 30 members of the committee will be asked to review every single applicant, there might be 60, and give them scores on a scale, let's say 1 to 5. 1 is good. If you're giving too many 5s, that means the screeners aren't doing their job right.
Really, most applicants are 1s, 2s, maybe 3s at this stage. It's a very narrow spectrum. You've selected the cream of the crop. So how does the committee decide from here?
If they're giving too many 1s, it means that you're not being really helpful. You're not being selective. Then at the meeting itself, the 1s are very, very briefly discussed, because if they have a 1, that means that the 30 committee members said, hey, this is someone we want here. So
Yeah.
We're not going to spend a lot of time. And if someone wants to raise an objection, they could.
So the superstar premeds don't actually take that much time or effort. Just like that, because the whole committee agrees, they're going to be accepted to one of the best medical schools in the nation. And then what about the rest?
And then you discuss those who might have a 1.1. It's once you get to like 1.6s and 1.7s, 1.6, 1.7, there's
Real discussion.
Open up.
Now we're at the students where there's a little bit of discussion. We have folks on the fence. Maybe half the committee felt like they were 1s and the other half felt like they were 2s. So here are the most intense discussions about these premeds on the bubble. Then we move past them. What does that look like?
And you'd get maybe to someone whose score was a 2 and a 2.2 and so forth. And then anything after that, the chair of the committee would say, okay, we've got another 25, 30 people who have less than or higher scores, 2.3. Unless there's the objection, we're going to put them off to the side.
Sheesh. So if they interviewed 60 premeds, they would discuss maybe 30, half of them, at the committee decision meeting. Then the chair calls it. What about if there was a diamond in the rough in the latter 30 students that they interviewed?
But someone said, nope, you know what, this person has a 2.6. I think the committee was being harsh. And so we would discuss that person. So everyone was giving a real hearing, a fair hearing at the meetings. Yeah.
Okay, so there are advocates on the committee, and if they feel strong enough, they can make a case to support your admission. And last, what happens to all the other premeds who got and did their interview, but were never high enough to be discussed?
Now, if they weren't discussed at all at Hopkins, that meant they were going to be in the rejection bin. Because everyone had read them. Remember, they'd been invited to interview. The interviewers didn't feel the need to push them. The committee.
Talk about the harsh reality of admissions. We started with 6,200 applications, interviewed about 600 or 10%, and ultimately 130 are in the class.
We can't take everyone. That doesn't mean they're not qualified. And there's some excellent individuals I've seen who I thought were terrific and didn't go. Yeah, the rest of the committee didn't feel that way.
While it's sad if you felt strongly about an applicant, but the committee didn't agree, it's democratic. And I think it's good that it takes an entire committee to agree on a student. But still, I asked Dean White about how he felt those students who he believes should have earned acceptance, but didn't.
Was I personally distraught? And
This is the reality behind medical school admissions at Johns Hopkins University. If you like this video, you'll love this video here where AdComs share what they can't stand, but don't always tell you. Goodbye.